Emmerdale tease that the discovery of Nate's body sends shockwaves through the village, not just because of the tragedy itself, but because of the tangled web of deception, grief, and guilt that unravels in its wake. As the investigation begins to gain momentum, John stands silently at the edge of a dark truth, one he has no intention of revealing. When the news first breaks, it is received with stunned disbelief. Nate's absence had stirred unease, but no one expected the outcome to be so grim. The village reels, each resident affected in their own way, none more than Kane and Tracy. Yet, behind the veil of mourning, John has already begun orchestrating a way out of the guilt that is clawing at his conscience. John's fear doesn't manifest in tears or silence, but in motion. He begins crafting a plan, meticulous and cold. Owen, a man already entangled in minor village gossip and suspicion, becomes his scapegoat. John plays the long game, quietly planting the seeds, twisting the narrative, until Owen's name becomes synonymous with mystery and mistrust. The perfect decoy. He knows what he's doing. The psychology of guilt, the mechanics of manipulation, John understands it all. He begins by feeding subtle lies to those around him, exploiting Owen's already fragile state. He visits Owen under the guise of checking in, leaving behind traces, a false trail. Then comes Liam's report to the police. Owen has vanished, and Liam is worried. He had planned to meet Owen, but received no reply. When DS Walsh contacts Liam with an update, the room spins. Owen is dead. The police reveal that a note, typed on Owen's laptop, has surfaced. It is a written confession to the murder of Nate, riddled with guilt, ending with a declaration of intent to take his own life. A suicide under the weight of guilt, a neat conclusion to a case that once seemed shrouded in uncertainty. But police procedure demands a closer look. The investigation will continue. There are still inconsistencies, gaps in the timeline, and strange coincidences that refuse to settle. Liam is disturbed. Something about the sequence of events doesn't sit right. DS Walsh tries to reassure him, pointing to the clarity of the confession and the digital footprint that backs up Owen's supposed actions. But Liam, who has lived with loss, who knows how grief can wear masks, senses something off. Kane and Tracy are summoned. The detective relays the discovery, the note, the confession, and the official position, that Owen was Nate's killer, and the guilt drove him to suicide. Kane's eyes do not flicker with closure. Instead, confusion and rage spark in equal measure. The story doesn't add up. Kane asks questions, dozens of them, but Liam, bound by procedural discretion, offers little. John is present, performing the role of shocked bystander. He shakes his head, eyes wide with disbelief. He plays the part perfectly, even as Kane's anger begins to flare. Kane's grief doesn't find peace in the neat resolution the police have offered. Instead, he turns more suspicious, more restless. John had hoped that Kane's rage would subside once someone was blamed. Instead, Kane's instincts push him toward a more dangerous place. He corners Liam, demands answers, demands inconsistencies be addressed. Liam tries to deflect, but Kane is relentless. Liam tries to calm him, even drawing from his own tragedy, the memory of Leanna's death, the unbearable pain that followed. He offers understanding. Kane sees it as obstruction. John watches the encounter, anxiety threading every breath he takes. This was not the outcome he'd hoped for. He wanted closure, misdirection, and relief. But his only succeeded in further igniting Kane's fury. It won't take much, a single clue, a shift in the wind, for everything to come crashing down. The pressure tightens around John's chest. Every knock at the door, every stranger's glance sets his pulse racing. He begins to unravel slowly. His sleep is fractured, his thoughts a blur of dread and guilt. And so, he turns to a helpline. He doesn't say his name, doesn't reveal what's truly eating away at him. He just wants someone to listen. But when the volunteer suggests speaking over the phone, something in John recoils. No. It's too personal, too close. He hangs up. Coincidentally, the next day Paddy confides in Marlon that he's started volunteering at a mental health crisis line. Marlon smiles, proud of his friend, but John, passing by and catching part of the conversation, feels his world tilt. What if Paddy had been the one he nearly confessed to? The village, blissfully unaware of the intricate deception, carries on. But Robert, ever observant, is less quick to let things lie. He finds Owen's death unsettling, too perfectly timed, too clean. When Claudette, in passing, mentions that John had visited Owen just before his death, Robert's suspicion takes root. That single detail haunts him. He arranges a meeting with Steve, Owen's brother, under the pretense of offering condolences. What Steve reveals changes everything. On the day Nate died, Owen had an airtight alibi. He was at a training seminar 2 towns away, corroborated by attendance records, photos, and several witnesses. Robert is stunned. None of this fits with the story the police presented. The weight of what he's heard pushes Robert to act. He visits the station and speaks with D.S. Walsh, recounting what Steve told him. But D.S. Walsh explains that the evidence against Owen includes digital confessions and metadata that places Owen in the area. When Robert presses, the officer points out the lack of motive and the strength of the confession. Still, he promises to reopen aspects of the investigation. Robert walks away feeling unheard, frustrated, but not defeated. He knows what he heard. He knows what he believes. And now, he begins to watch John more closely, looking for the cracks, for the tells. John, sensing the shift in Robert's demeanor, grows even more paranoid. He tries to avoid him, fumbles explanations, overcorrects. The lies he's built into a fortress begin to creak. And he knows, deep down, that if Kane ever learns the truth, if Robert breathes a single word in the wrong direction, it won't be the police he'll need to worry about. It will be Kane. John's world continued to contract with each passing day. The weight of his deception clung to him like fog. He had expected relief when the police deemed the case closed, yet peace eluded him. Every sideways glance from Robert felt like an accusation. Every silence from Kane roared like a coming storm. There was no escaping the guilt that wrapped tighter around his chest. He watched Kane from afar, his movements sharper, his temper shorter. Kane had grown increasingly frustrated with the lack of clarity. He didn't believe in convenient endings. The idea that Owen had killed Nate and then taken his own life felt like a fiction tailored to make the pain more digestible. And Kane had never been one for sugar-coated lies. John tried to maintain his composure, to stay within the illusion he'd built. But Robert's eyes, now constantly observing, burned holes in his narrative. At the Woolpack, Robert sat quietly nursing a pint, his mind turning. He no longer doubted John's involvement, he just didn't know how to prove it. It was Claudette again, who pushed the truth closer. She innocently mentioned that John had looked shaken after his visit to Owen, that he seemed desperate to make sure no one else knew he'd gone there. That tiny detail gnawed at Robert, and he began to probe deeper. He asked Steve for access to Owen's laptop, and Steve, confused but compliant, handed over the device. What Robert found was damning. The confession letter had been typed, yes, but it had been modified. The metadata showed the original file was a completely different document, overwritten with the confession text. Even more suspicious, the formatting and grammar didn't match any of Owen's prior writing samples. Robert, remembering that John had a background in journalism, saw the connection and felt his stomach turn. He took the findings straight to D.S. Walsh. The officer was skeptical at first, but the digital inconsistencies could not be ignored. Forensic technicians were assigned to verify the data, and quietly, the case was reopened, without notifying John. Meanwhile, Kane cornered Liam once more, demanding a full disclosure. Liam remained cautious, unwilling to breach protocol, but shared a quiet truth: he too believed something didn't sit right. Though he had no proof, his instincts warned him that someone else was involved. Liam's moment of honesty only served to sharpen Kane's obsession. As the cracks widened, John's psychological state continued to deteriorate. He phoned the helpline again, only this time he didn't hang up. He still withheld his identity, but his voice trembled. The volunteer, calm and warm, asked questions about his guilt, his fear, and the growing sense of isolation. John listened. He even responded. And though he said little of substance, that single call marked the beginning of his unraveling. Later that week, Paddy joined a village event and casually mentioned to Marlon that a caller on his shift the night before had sounded deeply troubled, and for some reason, hauntingly familiar. Marlon dismissed it at first, but when John passed by and Paddy instinctively turned toward him, something flickered behind his eyes. Robert, having received preliminary confirmation of the altered document, returned to Steve and asked if Owen had ever shown signs of depression. Steve shook his head. Owen was private, yes, but he was stable. He had recently been offered a promotion, and had even booked a holiday. Suicide had never once crossed Steve's mind. The revelations weighed heavily. Robert knew that if the police stalled or tried to bury the reopened inquiry, he would need to go public. He contacted a reporter from Hot 10, someone who had once run an exposé on police mishandling of evidence. He didn't name John yet, but he laid out the facts: an innocent man framed, digital forensics ignored, grief weaponized. The reporter agreed to dig. John sensed the noose tightening. When D.S. Walsh unexpectedly asked to meet for a follow-up conversation, he nearly collapsed. He played his part again: shock, sorrow, the worn-out act of a man caught in communal mourning. But he left the station drenched in sweat. Kane's instincts burned hotter now. He confronted John outright, at the garage. The air between them was thick with accusation. Kane didn't ask questions, he made statements. You were there. You knew something. You're hiding something. John deflected, avoided eye contact, mumbled excuses. It wasn't enough. Kane grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the wall before Liam intervened. Liam warned Kane that his grief was turning destructive, that vengeance wouldn't bring Nate back. But the warning came too late. Kane had already made up his mind: he would uncover the truth himself, by any means necessary. Robert, torn between revealing what he knew and letting the police handle it, realized that the longer he waited, the greater the danger to everyone involved. He returned to Steve and shared his suspicions directly. Steve's face turned pale. The idea that Owen had been murdered, used, and discarded tore through him. But he agreed to go with Robert to the station and make a formal complaint. The next morning, Emmerdale was anything but calm. A quiet hush of anticipation spread through the village. The police raided John's home, seizing his computer, external drives, and documents. D.S. Walsh had finally been granted a search warrant, after the digital forensic team confirmed the manipulation of the suicide letter. John was taken into custody. The village erupted. Kane stood outside the police station, fists clenched, eyes empty. Tracy, horrified, broke down in tears. Liam sat alone in his office, shoulders slumped in bitter acceptance. And Robert watched, not with satisfaction, but with solemn vindication. But it wasn't over. The laptop's hard drive revealed drafts, several versions of the confession. The first had been partially composed in John's voice, complete with phrases he had used in previous articles. The damning detail came from a deleted email found in the recycle bin, sent from John's account to his own personal email, containing a link to a file called owenconfession_final.docx. In his police interview, John didn't resist. He didn't deny. He wept. Not for himself, but for the moment he realized everything he had done had not erased the pain, only multiplied it. He spoke of guilt, of a confrontation that turned physical, of a fatal blow that hadn't been planned. He confessed to staging the scene, fabricating the letter, and manipulating the police investigation. The villagers reacted with disbelief, sorrow, and rage. Claudette, shaken to her core, retreated from public view. Steve, furious and broken, held a vigil for Owen and vowed to clear his brother's name in every public record possible. Kane disappeared for days, and when he returned, his face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. Tracy kept her distance. Robert, though vindicated, struggled to find peace. He had stopped a lie, but it hadn't brought Nate back. He stood at Nate's grave, alone, whispering an apology for not seeing through it sooner. And in the quiet nights of the village, the echoes of betrayal lingered. Emmerdale was forever changed. The truth had come out. But it had left behind a silence that no one knew how to fill.